Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first in our Urban Living Insight series. This event was originally meant to be in person, but due to numerous industrial actions, we've had to go online today, which is a bit of a shame, but we've got a fantastic panel, and it does enable us to reach more of you, but future Urban Living Insights events will be face-to-face. So you can see our agenda on the screen there. First session, first of the three 30-minute discussions is going to be about single family and suburban build to rent. Then we're going to look at build to rent's role in addressing the housing crisis. And then we are going to talk about ESG and climate change. My name's George Sell. I'm editor-in-chief at International Hospitality Media. We're a publisher of online B2B news websites for the hospitality and real estate sectors. And we are also event and awards organisers. Now, these events are sponsored by H&G and Scape. And to tell us a bit more about H&G, here is the group CEO, Alex Stewart.
Thanks, George. Good morning, everybody. It's a huge disappointment not to be holding this Urban Living Insight in person, but do not fear, it's not November 2020. We haven't got a 4-month lockdown ahead of us. And in the words of the late Queen, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, we will meet again. Hopefully next week, actually, at the Urban Living Insights, focusing on senior living on the 17th. Thank you to IHM for organising today's event. 3 great topics with some expert panellists for each. So very briefly, what is H&G? We are quite simply an interior fit-out business focusing on the living sector. We can take a grey box and move it all the way to the point where someone can move in and start paying rent. We've got a particular focus on sustainability, and we've actually done a lot of work with some of Ding's colleagues from Longevity Partners on projects. So I'm really interesting to see what the ESG topic will throw up today. And now that's all from me, so I'll hand back to George, our very own Jeremy Paxman, to get everything underway.
Thanks, Alex. Okay, so our first session today is about single family and suburban build to rent. And we've got 2 panelists who are coming at this area of the market from completely different directions. So it'll be great to get their very different perspectives. And I'm just going to ask them both to introduce themselves quickly before we get into the discussion. Anthony, would you like to go first and introduce yourself? Good morning to you.
Yeah, thank you, George, and good morning to everyone. Looking forward to seeing you in person very soon. But yeah, so I'm the ops director for Present Made, a subsidiary of Apache Capital. But essentially my role is setting up the operating and management platform for Present Made, whilst also focusing on the mobilisation of our sites. As yet, we don't have any operational sites, but our first one will be in Cambridge. All going well, we will start construction this side of Christmas and have our first occupations late next year. But that development will be 261 apartments or multifamily and 112 single family houses. So exciting space.
Thanks, Anthony. And Sam, good morning to you. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Sam Kempe. I'm one of the founders and the CIO of IMMO. We are a tech-driven investment management firm focusing on the resi space. The way we use technology, we've built the technology everywhere from sourcing all the way through to acquisitions, renovations, leasing, property management, portfolio management. So we're really a one-stop shop, very much focusing on the existing SFR space. So admittedly, we don't do build to rent, but the reality is the existing SFR space, which is all the individual houses and apartments, that actually makes up 98% of the resi market. We're currently working with big institutions. We've raised about 2 billion and working with large institutions such as Naveen. We started off in Germany, so the most of our operations have actually been in Germany to date, but we launched in Spain earlier this year as well, and we are launching in the UK in Q1 next year.
Excellent. Thank you, Sam. We saw a recent report from CBRE which showed that nearly 1/3 of all investment into the UK build-to-rent market in the first half of the year was into suburban and single-family projects. This number appears to be growing. Anthony, what do you think is the potential ceiling of this? How big a chunk of the build to rent investment market do you think single family and suburban will eventually take?
Yeah, I'm going to list off a few stats here, but essentially, there's huge potential. Family rental housing is the biggest asset class in the world, and institutional penetration rates in Europe are just less than 5%. 60% of private rented accommodation in the UK is houses, and so not flats. And 35%, like as of today, long-term private renters have children. Only 7% live in houses. So that's 4.5 million people without purpose-built and designed single family renting or housing. If we look at the demographics, the two fastest demographics in the UK are young families and the over 65s, which could potentially be considering downsizing or moving out to those, those areas where we're looking at. I think, the for sale market will play a key role. If it's strong, it's challenging for single family housing investors and developers like us to acquire sites, as ultimately we're directly competing with volume house builders. So but on the flip side, a weaker housing market, it's an additional incentive for house builders to potentially adopt rental strategies. So it'd be interesting to see how that space evolves, especially in this current market. The sector will keep growing as professionally managed operational real estate, ultimately redefines the UK property landscape. And, I think I read something the other day from Savills, they believe that, professionally, managed operational real estate will quadruple in size. So, watch this space. I think as well, finally, we've sort of seen an exodus with the buy to let landlord, and this will also support the growth of existing single stock family housing as well. So kind of perfect storms almost brewing in that regard.
Thanks, Anthony. Sam, you mentioned that you started out in Germany and then Spain, and the UK is the third market you're in. Perhaps for a bit of context, could you tell us how the UK market compares with other European countries in terms of the size of the rental market, attitudes to renting, and the type of stock available?
Yeah, so obviously, you can so continental Europe very different to the UK, as you just mentioned, and you can really sort of split it between really Northern Europe and Southern Europe as well. Southern Europe is still a bit more of a owner-occupier market, the same way that the UK is, but within the urban cities, it's the same dynamics as we have in the UK, and in terms of more and more people renting and the demand outstripping supply. In Northern Europe, it's a much more established rental market. The rental market there is relatively mature. The regulations around it, protecting tenants is pretty mature as well. Things like, Germany has pretty strict rent regulations as well, which some investors get very, very scared of. We don't, as from our perspective, as long as all the underwrites day one have factored in the sort of whatever the rent caps are or the rental table, and your numbers still stack up, it actually provides a lot of certainty and of how the rents are going to be progressing, as opposed to what you have at the moment, where in so many other parts of Europe, where governments are suddenly springing up with rent caps, like Spain, Portugal, Ireland. I know in Scotland, they now got rent freezers. In the UK, there's some debate about this. So, in those countries that don't have sort of an established sort of rent table framework, the government interventions are sort of catching investors a bit by surprise. In terms of, but like I said, in Germany, it's incredibly strong rental market, same dynamics, huge imbalance between supply and demand. And, you often hear stories in Germany of, open days or open houses for rents and tenants sort of queuing out of the door, down the stairs, down the streets, just waiting to sort of view the property. In terms of the housing stock in continental Europe, it's majority apartments. In the UK, it's obviously majority houses, as Anthony was mentioning. However, in what we've seen though, where there are houses in Germany, there is huge demand for them as well. And, a house goes onto the market for rent and it's gone within hours. If that is incredibly hot, and actually that is only going to get more extreme in places like Germany, where parts of some of the municipalities have actually banned the any new supply of houses coming online. And the reason they've done that is because they believe that any new supply coming online should only be apartments, and because it's a lot more eco-friendly and environmentally sustainable. So things like that, they've completely restricted the supply of new houses in certain areas. So yeah, demand for houses is only going to be increasing.
Okay. And Sam, when you're assessing properties to buy in the UK, particularly new developments from house builders, what will you be looking for in your single family rental stock? What does a development need to be appropriate for that market and to attract you to it?
I mean, it comes down to the sort of the typical sort of fundamentals. Does someone want to live there? We're not looking, unlike some of the other sort of build to rent schemes around SFR, we're not looking for near amenities on site or anything like that. It's like, for us, it's much more basic. There's so much, as Anthony was saying, so much existing stock already rents. So for us, it's much more about, do the numbers stack up for that particular unit? Do the stars essentially align for what your discount can be, what your rent is, what your ongoing OPEX? It doesn't mean that every new build unit that comes our way is going to work for us. But I think what we're seeing from, and this isn't even just a recent occurrence as well, but, developers and house builders, they'll often have 3, 5, 10 units left at the end of a scheme that they haven't, that are much slower to shift. And, they may be less attractive from a owner occupier perspective, but if, they're still going to rent at the right price. And if we can buy them at the right discount, because we're maybe doing a slight bulk buy, then again, like I said, the numbers really do stack up. And for the developers or the house builders, is actually in their interest, they're more open to taking discounts, especially in this market as well, because the cost of keeping sales and marketing on site, just to shift those last few units, it's really costly. They want to sort of be able to move on to the next scheme.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Anthony, a lot of the investment that we mentioned earlier in the CBR report is institutional investors buying large tranches of inventory from house builders. So the product isn't specifically built for rent. It was originally built for the private sale, but it's come into the rental market. Could you talk to us a bit about what a purpose-built and bespoke single-family rental home and the wider development it's in will look like, and how will it differ from the regular house builder product?
Yeah, and look, I think there's two key areas that ultimately, where build to rent is different to the, SFRs, and I kind of break it down to the first is like what all build to rent operators are doing is that offering around convenience and flexibility, the 24/7 concierge, the flexible leases, the parcel collection, pet friendly, furnished, high speed internet, the one bill, access to cheaper and green utilities. I think all the build to rent operators there or thereabouts are doing those what's. I think the second key aspect is kind of the warm and fuzzy stuff, I guess, and that's the community, the connections, the wellness and sustainability. I think a lot of build to rent operators are saying this, but I think more and more now they're actually doing it better and better. And I think the challenge is how do you actually achieve that warm and fuzzy stuff. And I think if you break it down, it's kind of like, by designing, building and activating spaces, and predominantly activating spaces is through events and cultural programs, getting people, residents and customers out of their houses into the spaces, using them and making connections. Because, I think if you get that stuff right, that's why residents will stay longer. They'll pay a premium. And ultimately I think that requires a lot of kind of careful thought and consideration of those spaces. It's an oversight and not including those amenities could potentially also be a deterrent to a build to rent investor as well. So yeah, we're a big believer in getting those spaces right, designing them, activating them, and again, that's we see people living in our buildings and communities for sort of 3 to 4 years, and that's where we find a lot of value. So yeah, that's where we see the difference as well. I guess just thinking out loud now, another difference is that we see a lot of ancillary income driven from our communities as well, and single family housing is or build to rent generally it's all about net operating income. So how do you find those additional opportunities? And I think ultimately, as Sam said before, there are sometimes a few extra costs associated with supporting that, but they can be offset with really driving ancillary income and additional revenue. And just the other day, I was sitting around with our design team looking at our amenity spaces in Eddington. How do we design them to make sure that we can put in I don't know if you guys know it, but a Scanomat coffee machine where the resident can pay for it. So all those little tiny things add up, and I know that everyone's pushing for ancillary at the moment, but reaching that kind of 5 or 6% nirvana for ancillary income is difficult, but having the expertise and the spaces to do it becomes a lot more achievable, and ultimately you're hitting those desirable NOIs, which ultimately add value and attracts build to rent investors.
Yeah, I like this idea of trying to engender a sense of community in a business scheme, and I guess events programming is one way to do that. Can you maybe give us a quick sketch of what an events program at your schemes will look like? And is it primarily aimed at kind of families with kids, or is it broader than that?
Yeah, I think a typical kind of cultural events program, if we look at a week as a snapshot, there could be between 20 and 25 events, and if we break them down, I think there'll be resident or community events. So that might be somewhere where Jill in apartment or house 26 wants to start a running club, and she's going to use our app and start a community group and get all the residents to meet on a Saturday morning at 9 o'clock and go for a run. There could be cooking clubs and things like that. I think so. The resident or the community-led events will probably be between 50 and 70% of what normal events would happen in a week, and you really do leverage off what skills, expertise, and desires that the community and residents want. The other piece will be what we call the curated events, the events that we will put on. So we will bring in personal trainers or run really high level fitness classes, yoga classes, meditation classes, and really focus on those wellness and sustainability piece of the offering as well. So we'd anticipate, like I said, between 20 and 25 events per week. And again, what's the big driver for that? It's ultimately to get people out their houses, talking, making connections, and hopefully growing, not just personally, maybe professionally. And the idea is that then hopefully they lead more fulfilling lives, and again, they want to keep renewing, stay longer, and pay more. So that's the basis of our offering.
So your potential, your target demographic audience is probably slightly different and slightly more affluent than some of the house builder stock that's been bought and gone straight into the rental market.
Oh, I wouldn't say that. I think that we tick all those normal kind of private rental sector boxes. We tick those boxes. So I think we don't want to discount that market in any way, shape, or form as well. I think if anything, we, like I kind of said before, we attract those type of residents to our buildings and communities, because it's getting harder and harder for residents to deal with all the issues of a high street landlord or a private landlord or something along those lines. So I think we capture that market. The other piece I think is that ultimately our offering is intergenerational. So if we look at our our Eddington site in Cambridge, we'll be attracting everyone from students to downsizers and everyone in between. So you know, going back to that community and event offering, it's going to be really important we tailor, you know, an event schedule that supports that as well. So yeah, but I think it's a wider target audience, in short.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. Sam, you mentioned that you often will pick up the last few units on a house builder scheme that they're struggling to sell. I think it's probably fair to say selling houses is going to get tougher in the next couple of years. You know, mortgage availability is coming down, disposable income is going down, so the market's going to be tougher all around. Do you think house builders are going to be selling a bigger proportion of their inventory into the rental market, and how do you think that will affect how they plan future developments? And could they even go the whole hog and become, you know, establish a rental division themselves?
Yeah. In terms of just addressing the first point, in terms of, you know, will more house builders look to sell to professional investors? I think if more institutional investors are prepared to not have all the units on a single site, and, you know, they become more open to the efficiencies that technology can deliver, because a lot of investors are still like, you know, we first talk to people are like, oh my gosh, computer says no. Like, we just can't compute how you can have 3 units here, 5 units there, 1 unit here. And obviously we're not doing like 2 in Devon, 1 in, you know, 1 in Reading. Like, you know, they are relatively within, you know, relatively clustered within urban areas. So I think if institutions become open to, you know, to using more technology to be able to efficiently manage dispersed units, then yes, house builders will be able to, you know, combine privatization strategies, selling to consumers and selling to institutions. And you've seen this in the US as well. So the existing SFR market, when I say it's more kind of like the granular dispersed units, that market is incredibly established, incredibly mature. The majority of the SFR market in the US is granular stock. It's not, you know, there obviously are, you know, institutions doing whole schemes the same way people are mainly doing it in the UK, but the majority of it is granular dispersed. So there, the house builders definitely are, you know, splitting stock between institutions and consumers. The second part of your question, though, will house builders move more into the rental piece? I mean, maybe. It's honestly, it's not their core business. It would have to be a major strategic move. You know, Anthony will definitely attest to this, that it's not, I mean, most people know it's not a small feat to just step into the operations piece and the ongoing management pieces. It takes major investment and commitment to build out both, you know, the operations platform from a physical piece, you know, a manual piece, but also from, you know, the tech piece, the infrastructure that you need to be developing to support it as well. I guess if there was a major house builder that was really focused on it, I think their best bet would probably be to acquire an existing operator and sort of like bring it in-house and do it that way, rather than necessarily trying to build it from scratch. That's, yeah, I see maybe that happening potentially.
And this granular process of having units spread around obviously complicates things for you as well. So do you work with partners on the management and the letting side? How does the model work?
Yeah, so on the letting side, we actually, well, if I go, so on the renovations piece, we plan everything in-house, and we essentially sort of project manage it in-house ourselves, but then work with multiple different contractors, third-party contractors that we can sort of, you know, move around, you know, different assets and, you know, projects as and when they come online. In terms of the lettings, we've actually ended up doing all of that in-house ourselves. It's not been, we thought we would end up using third-party agents or brokers, but it's actually been a lot easier. We've, you know, digitized a lot of that process. So it really is pretty simple for us, and our lease up rates are really fantastic. So many of our properties are actually, we've already agreed the rentals before the properties have even been fully renovated, which is sort of showing the demand for the assets. And also when it comes to the property management piece, anything that's consumer facing, we we still manage and we take control of. Reason being is that we really believe in that relationship with the consumer as well, and managing that relationship ourselves. In terms of the execution of the property management piece, in terms of if the boiler needs to be checked or something like that, then we work with sort of best in class sort of local contractors to be able to execute those pieces. But I think also the reason we believe so much about keeping that piece in house as well is, and the reason it is so important for us, is because being able to control the data along that part of the value chain and control the quality and the frequency of how that data is captured is really, really important to us. As soon as you start farming that out to third parties, doesn't matter what SLAs you have in place, like, you're going to spend half your life just trying to manage other people to input data correctly. And for us, the data collation around it is so critical, especially even just when it comes, not just for understanding our portfolio and being able to manage it better, but then even for fundamental pieces like being able to report transparently and comprehensively to our institutional investors. So really, really important for us that we keep that in-house.
Great stuff. Thank you, Sam. We've got a quick question for you from the audience, from Jake Jeffcott, who asks, what kind of locations are you working on in Germany? What scale and what type of houses do you mainly focus on?
Yeah, so we've raised over 2 billion already for across Europe. Sort of about up to 1 billion of that is for Germany. It's a little bit more difficult at the moment in Germany because the yields are relatively lower in comparison to like UK or Spain, and the debt costs have shot through the roof. So admittedly, like value add strategies in Germany are struggling a bit at the moment. It is much more of a core plus strategy, and we have a pipeline of investors there that are interested, but yeah, the value add stuff is definitely a bit more challenging. In terms of locations, we've been buying in tier 1 cities and the sort of the commuter areas around the sort of the city boundaries. As soon as you go out of the city boundaries, there isn't rent control as well, so that sort of you can charge a bit more sort of market rents at that point. We have started going to some of the tier 2 cities as well, such as Hanover. The rental markets have been really strong there. I think really though the point is that anywhere that there is an existing rental market, this really works. You've already got evidence of demand, which is why I was saying, our properties rent even before the renovations have completed, because there is already existing demand. It really shows as well that, there is such an undersupply of good quality properties, homes in existing locations. For us, it's also really important. It should not be that the only way someone can access a good quality home is to move halfway across a city into a new build property. They should be able to stay within their existing communities and neighborhoods and still find still find good quality homes. I think in this day and age, especially when you look at wellness, mental health, and Anthony was talking, it's so important that they're doing so much to try and really establish community in these new build schemes. But if you have existing community, you don't want to be forced to choose between them and a good quality home.
Excellent stuff. Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Anthony, for your input on that first of our discussions. Really, really interesting stuff there. We're going to move on to our second session now, which is looking at build to rent's role in addressing the housing crisis. We've got, again, 2 fantastic speakers. If I could ask them to introduce themselves in turn, starting with you, please, Brendan. Good morning to you. Brendan, are you there? Let's start with you, Matt, please.
I think Brendan, there's no audio coming through, so I'll go first. Are you up?
Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Yes, we can. Yes.
Apologies all. Brendan Geraghty, Chief Exec of the UKAA. We represent the build to rent industry in the United Kingdom and really are the authority on build to rent and its emerging place in the housing market.
Thank you, Brendan. Good morning to you, and good morning to you, Matthew.
Good morning. So my name is Matt. I work with Greystar. For those not familiar with Greystar, we are a vertically integrated multifamily provider. We have over 780,000 units and beds under management across the world. Our 3 core lines of business are investment management, construction and development, and property management. I work within our European team. We have now more than 30,000 units live in 7 markets, including some of those that Samantha mentioned earlier. And my role is, I've been here 7 years, or been at Greystar 7 years. I'm a business to consumer expert, and I've helped Greystar over the years build a scalable engine of growth so that we can capitalize as we enter these new markets. Not always perfect, trust me. I think my hairline's receded quite a bit since I started. But effectively, whether that's through brand, technology, or new business models, that's where I spent my time.
Great stuff. Thanks, Matt. I should have mentioned earlier that we are posting quite a lot of information in the chat here, including the LinkedIn profiles of all our speakers. So if you would like to carry on the conversation with our speakers afterwards, then I would encourage you to connect with them. And you can also see more details about how to get in touch with Alex at H&G. Right, so to give this section of the event a bit of context, the government's aim is to deliver 300,000 new units to the market every year. And we're not really coming anywhere close to this. In the financial year 2020 to 2021, 216,000 were delivered. I think this year it might be around 225, 230, but the gap in the housing stock that's needed and what's being provided is widening every year. I'm interested to know what you guys think build to rent's role can be in addressing that shortfall, and what is needed for the industry to take a bigger role, whether that's government intervention, whether it's more investment, and so on. Brendan, can I ask you to start with that one, please?
Certainly. The answer to the question is that build to rent really does have a very significant role to play. The genesis of the housing crisis and why we deliver so few homes is complicated, but what it does is really create a fundamental huge demand for homes in the land, and we are simply not supplying enough, and we all know that. So what can build to rent do? One of the things that build rent does is that it provides a fairly narrow offering, in as much as it's a rented accommodation, initially in apartments, although now single living accommodation is becoming the sort of the new frontier. Build to rent in time will broaden. It will I think, or not build to rent, that the rental living experience will broaden to include everything from student through to co-living, and ultimately through to over 55 or retirement living. I think the broad church of rental accommodation is going to grow, and it's going to become more acceptable, and I think it's going to become more popular. The recent Home Views reports on the residents' experience of build to rent are glowing, and puts it above private rental accommodation in the surveys that they've done. But at the same time, we still have to deliver the homes, and the frustration at the moment, we've delivered about 76,000 homes, and the frustration really is that we can't deliver more. Within that, the government's sort of bias towards for sale housing is an obstacle. The housing process, the planning process rather, is an obstacle, but they're not necessarily deal breakers themselves. I think rental accommodation can sit very happily with for sale housing and for sale homes. They're not at war with each other. Certainly, they're just different options in the marketplace. I think the planning system needs to recognize that build to rent is a quality driven agenda. And that's really the narrative that we want to get out there. The rental sector has had some bad press, but if you speak to the National Landlords Association, they're working very, very hard to actually show that, yes, there's always a few bad apples, but for the most part, people want to do a good job. Build to rent has come in with institutional backing and wants to do an even better job, and is doing so. And I think one of our greatest benefits is that because we are financed in the way that we are, we can move very, very quickly. And if we look at the stock that has been delivered in a fairly short period of time, it demonstrates a great commitment and a great willingness to make those investments. And that talks to a larger agenda. It talks to productivity, because we're at the forefront of modern methods of construction. I mean, Greystar have, until very recently, the tallest modern methods volumetric building in Europe. and had to and had pioneered the use of that technology. That talks to the digitization of construction. That talks to productivity. We deliver on the leveling up agenda because we bring with us not just homes but jobs, and we bring a desire to create community. And our investors and our operators are there for the long term. So they want to be in places and be really important players in those spaces. So we offer a great deal, I would argue. I think I think we would like to offer more. I think there are viability issues. I think there are planning issues. And I think that government needs to really get behind renting a little bit more than they do at the moment, and particularly build to rent.
Thank you, Brendan. Matt, Brendan alluded to the fact that a large proportion of the build to rent market is institutionally funded. So the money is there to scale up delivery. He also alluded to planning issues. From your perspective, what is needed to ramp up the delivery of units in the UK?
A greater playing field, I guess, and less focus on trying to quantify and put something into a box of, is this built for sale, is this built for rent, is this urban living, suburban living, is this co-living, is this single family housing? And basically, no one solution is going to be the silver bullet. So effectively, it's about diversification and different ways of thinking. So you need to allow those different variables. And to what Brendan was saying, I echo, as the rental housing potentially still carries an awful lot of stigma, even though it's now building up that success case and at scale, delivering on its promise of purpose-built, intentional housing that adds value not only to those people that live in the assets, but actually the communities around it. And when we talk about that investment for purpose-built rental housing, yes, there are different hold to maturity periods, but in general, a lot of it is backed by large institutions, pension funds. They're here for the long term to see that return. So the challenge really is just, it's compartmentalized as one thing. The solution is broader than that. And if we can all work together and understand how we fit those variables, some can move at speed pretty quickly. Some can deliver a more affordable solution based on potentially existing land opportunities they have. Some people take a back seat or maybe have to pay a premium to even get an opportunity to do that. So I basically believe in we can all get there together if we join forces.
And you're working across Europe, Matt. What do you think the sector here can learn from other countries when it comes to providing a broad product offer?
Yeah, I think, well, Samantha mentioned it earlier, and I fundamentally believe in the psychology of renting and why people choose to rent. So for me, a home is a feeling. It's not necessarily a particular place. I can go on holiday, open the door and think, I'd love to live here. I'm sure we've all done that, basically. So in terms of like home ownership, I'm at that I barely scrape the millennial bracket, basically, and I grew up with an expectation that I should own my own home. It took me kind of 10 years to do that. Every year it got a little bit harder, I felt, and a general sense of failure. My nephew's just coming through school now with the kind of vocation that he wants to go into. He's going to want to travel the world and things like that. So his sense of, possession of a home is probably not there. So in Europe, what we see, and Samantha alluded to this earlier, across the different northern or southern markets is it's renting is wanted, basically. There's a fundamental shift in some of those markets where it's wanted, and there isn't that stigma of home ownership. So people seek their growth in their mobility, their personal development, whether they're kind of doing their own investments. There's this legacy of like home ownership. That said, I do believe that anyone who wants to own their home should be offered the ability to own their home, but it's a slightly outdated concept necessarily on the most macro sense to just assume everyone wants to own their home. So what we can learn is tapping into more the psychology of why people choose to rent and starting to build products, services and offerings that cater to that need and start to predict those future needs, of which I see a few players starting to do that now.
And the planning piece that Brendan mentioned earlier, is that less of an issue in the European countries where you work? I mean, is build to rent sufficiently understood by planning authorities in the UK?
I wouldn't say so. There's an awful lot of difference in those regions and even like the municipalities within it, and it can get hyper local as well. So the use case of your building, whether it can be like a permanent residence or whether it's temporary, it can create some of those challenges, and whether you're abiding to certain kind of rules and regulations and rental protections. So in general, the concept of providing rental housing is greatly adopted in Europe and in those different markets versus the UK, but there are still some challenges around the actual sincerity of the product offering that you wish to deliver to meet that highest quality for the most affordable factor you can deliver.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Matt. Brendan, here in the UK, I've been to visit some fantastic build to rent schemes. They're very smart, they're highly amenitized, they're generally in quite desirable urban locations, and they're very good at serving a particular demographic niche, but they aren't for everybody. Is the sector doing enough to provide mid-market and economy price point rentals, and can it do this profitably while offering a quality product?
The short answer to that is yes, it can do it, though it's at an early stage in providing that mid-market solution. Just a couple of sort of background points here. We have conducted our now third Who Lives in Build to Rent survey, which is a collaboration between the UKAA, the British Property Federation, and London Business, and those results are going to be announced at our conference, which is next week on the 15th. But what they show consistently is that whilst the perceived demographic for build to rent is the millennials, and they certainly make up a good portion, they certainly do not make up the entire population and population profile of build to rent. And it really is and across the spectrum from the millennials and to some extent even younger, right the way through to older demographics and everyone in between. So one of the myths that we need to dispel straight away is that it's a young person's or it's a millennials product, and that's who's attracted to it, because it's clear it's attracted to a great deal of people. I think that some of the location issues and some of the amenities and those sort of things, particularly those who are starting off in their career and you want to get your first a place to live, their first home, that's a natural market, but it's not the exclusive market. In terms of the mid-market product, I think there is evidence already that we are providing that. So inevitably in all of these things, the early projects are maybe slightly higher end, and that's certainly been the case. But what we're starting to see now is a real push to a mid-market product. They're less amenitized. There are two amenities which are essential to build to rent. One is the biggest, fastest broadband pipe you can find, and the second one is responsive service. And those two things really are the fundamentals of build to rent in terms of the customer serving the customer. And the amenity provision then will vary. That will be, to my mind, a consistent part of build to rent, and the amenity play will vary depending on location, on market segmentation, and so on and so forth. But what we're seeing now is companies maybe not following the brand dynamics that perhaps we would see in other consumer markets, but looking at purpose and value-led companies as the way of also defining themselves within the market and segmenting themselves within the market. So we need to do more on the mid-market. It is the bigger market, but there are already a lot of schemes that are a lot of companies, a lot of BTR operators targeting that market, and I think we'll see that coming through increasingly now. Build to rent is a quality the build to rent differential is quality, not necessarily lavishness, but quality of accommodation, quality of care, and quality in terms of consistency of effectively outreach to the internet, which is now such an important part of all of our lives. So the quality agenda really is at the heart of it, and I think that the flight to quality will occur whether it be at the mid market, the low market, or the high end in terms of homes.
Thanks, Brendan. Matt, do Brendan's comments tally with what you're seeing in terms of an increasing appetite in the sector to provide more stock at a more accessible price point, that's accessible to a broader variety of people?
To mirror Brendan, the short answer is yes, but I think we need to work backwards on, the definition of mid-market. That's constantly going to shift. In terms of, what it takes for a product to be in front of a consumer to then offer that price that then they themselves can assess in the moment, the value, the affordability, whether they want to be fiscally on point and spend what they should, or whether they, we've all spent 10% extra on something because it's become a motive for us. But in terms of that mid-market, if we work backwards, what was the cost of the land? What was the cost of the financing structure, the construction, the labor? And to echo Brendan's point, you're delivering a quality product. So to still maintain that it delivers a quality product for people in all stages of their life, whether they're student, young professionals, couples, families, divorcees, retirees, you have to stay true to that commitment. And a purpose-led organization is still funded, whether by its donors or institutional capitals. There's money involved. So is there a sincerity, a desire, and a commitment to provide for the mid-market? Absolutely. But we all need a little bit of help on kind of keeping that mid-market threshold under control.
Okay, thanks, Matt. We saw a lot of rental stock leave the market during the Thatcher years, when a lot of council stock was sold off under the right to buy. And recently the government announced plans for a housing association right to buy. I'm having trouble keeping up to speed with government policy at the moment because it's all over the place. I believe that is still in place. Brendan, where do you think that leaves housing associations in their role as providers, and where do they fit in the build to rent sector? Because we've got things like shared ownership, affordable market rents. There are so many tenures now in that HA provider market. Where do they fit into build to rent?
It's a very, very good question, and I think we must start with what unites us with the housing association, the RP world, and that is the desire to deliver homes and to deliver long-term solution. Fundamentally, that alignment is, there's no space between build to rent and housing associations or even local authorities' desire to provide homes, and we want to provide them at quality as they do as well. We have different levers that we pull in order to deliver that and to create the communities that we want, but that fundamentally unites us. And it's a very powerful piece to start any conversation with the housing association sector but I think that what is the role for build to rent in housing associations? Well, depends who you talk to and what they might say. I think there's still a level of misunderstanding about what build to rent, what the offer is in build to rent, and also how to use build to rent effectively. So the UKA is currently engaged with an initiative which is talking to housing associations to figure out what is our role, what is build to rent's role for them, and what is their role for us. And what I'm pleased to say is that we both see great potential in learning from each other. For example, housing associations have great experience in dealing with scale. They have thousands and thousands and thousands of properties under management. And, build to rent is still learning that. Some of the bigger companies like Greystar do have many homes under management in the UK and certainly in the States, but by and large, our portfolios are not huge, and housing associations have a great experience in dealing with that sort of scale. But I think build to rent, what we're seeing as well is that housing associations and local authorities are building private sector companies that will allow them, because they're sometimes constrained by their own constitutions, allow them to develop private homes, and very often those are sold. What we're going to try and do is encourage them to develop build to rent, because they will then realize both the asset value and the revenue value, and that can be used to cross-fund some of the other kind of accommodation that they do need to provide. So I think we need to be clear that build to rent is not a panacea for social housing at all. all. They know that product range very, very well. But we do have something that we can offer into it. And certainly on big regeneration schemes, having a built to rent component amongst all the other types of tenure can only, to our mind, enrich the experience of living there, but also the value of the development overall, and generate revenue from different sources. So we are encouraging housing associations and local authorities to see built to rent as an important anchor tenant, if you like, within a broader regeneration, that they can look at revenue streams in a different way than they would do if they were developing houses for sale. And that revenue can be used to cross-subsidize and fund some of the more directly social housing aspects of their portfolio. So I hope for great collaboration with that industry going forward. We are already starting that process, and I think there's a need to understand how we best support each other in the process.
Yeah, thank you, Brendan. Matt, what's your take on that? Because we do now have for-profit registered providers, and some of what they're doing, some of the kind of higher rental price point tenures is not a million miles away from mid-scale build to rent. How do you see it all fitting together?
Well, look, first of all, I grew up in social housing, and obviously there's different definitions of that, but from council estate housing, and in a development that actually was kind of demolished and is a huge build for sale environment now over in Kidbrooke. My mum returned to social housing towards the end, and it's kind of top and tailed where I'm at. So you've got a doctor in a room, you've got a lawyer in a room, they're both really smart, they're both really passionate. If they both start talking about their own agenda and their own jargon, neither one of them understands each other. So I think earlier when Brendan referred to kind of like that more holistic principle approach, that's it. If we talk specifics though, if I talk about something that I'm very happy about with Greystar, in terms of like just one of our opportunities I can use, Greenford Quay, that place was an old disused GSK site that had no accessibility for anyone who lived there before. It just wasn't there. There's a couple of rock stars at Greystar lobbied for years, and in fact that I'm going to call someone out who I think's on here who's not my colleague anymore, but James Pargeter, and seeing the passion, the effort, the cadence, the commitment that went into kind of proving the sincerity. And then now you see Greenford 6 years later, and you've got what we would call build for rent product, you've got for sale product, you've got that opened up to the community as well. That's adding value to anyone else that came around it. We open up communities and events, people come in, that's all free. We do screenings on the river and things like that. And plus there'll be like the affordable solution within it. So almost in one manifestation, you can see how it could go, which is why can't we all coexist? There's enough room for everyone to thrive, survive, and to provide that ultimate need of homes for anyone who needs it, irrespective of rental, irrespective of single family housing, irrespective of home ownership or someone retiring. And to speak about the Spanish market, what I've learned there in particular is, with retirees, they'll move closer to their sons and daughters, not in the home, but they will move. So you see that in those kind of rental communities, we've just starting to lease up one in Madrid, just outside of Madrid. And it's not all of the young people and the young professionals that are in there. We've actually got an awful lot of retirees, and what they've been drawn to is very efficient space where they want to free up some of their capital for their children to move out of their homes. So they haven't got that "it's mine, I'm going to hold on to it" concept that maybe some of us still have. And then the provisions that we're offering at a very affordable rate with the municipality, that's been really hard work there actually, means that also the childcare is being offered by the grandparents on site within our buildings. So just look, there's enough room for us all to thrive, but we've all got to understand each other. We've all got to understand the bigger agenda, and then respect the nuance within it and play nicely.
Thanks, Matt. Brendan, I mentioned at the start of this conversation that the government's annual target for new home delivery is 300,000. We're falling well short of that at the moment. How many of the annual tally is build to rent currently delivering, and what do you think is the potential, say in 5 and 10 years time, for the sector to contribute?
I'm not exactly sure the number that's delivered year on year. I know the current volume of homes is about 76,000, and the sector's only sort of 10 years old, really. The appetite to deliver more homes, I think, is absolutely there. The funds committed to, the publicly stated fund commitment to the build-to-rent sector is in the trillions if you tot it all up. But the sector is destined to be worth about 550 billion. It's about 10 billion at the moment. So there's huge potential for growth. What's going to constrain that growth? Well, I think it's market conditions. We're in a very, very difficult patch at the moment. This will pass and will carry on, and a lot of the investors have a longer term view in build to rent than perhaps in the sales environment, but it still has to wash its face. But we've got two other major things coming down the track. The building safety bill is coming in. It's going to change a lot about buildings. It's going to make the amount of information that's going to be needed at planning to deal with those gateways is going to be more substantial. That's going to make planning even more difficult. The climate crisis is an even bigger issue. We don't really know, but we do know how to design net zero buildings, but we haven't designed any. Those buildings still have to come. We've made great progress in reducing carbon and lowering our what we consume, and that's going to have to continue. But to be successful, we're going to have to grapple both with climate change as well. So we have a housing crisis. We have a climate crisis, and to some extent we have a compliance, not a crisis. I think the building safety bill is very, very important and will be extremely important to the success of residential buildings going forward. But we still have to deal with those sort of things. So I think we need to recognize where we are, and that these buildings are complicated things to deliver. The planning process is often under-resourced, and to my mind, I don't think that planners I think they have a very, very challenging job. And I would say that we need to resource those entities much better than we do. They are the gateways to a lot of development and so to building control. But if we want to deliver more, we need to resource the due diligence process that will allow us to deliver more. The market will either decide that the schemes are viable now, or perhaps sometime in the future. Build to rent has a huge appetite to develop, and I do think councils and master plans around regeneration that recognize a role for build to rent will assist greatly. But we have some structural issues that we're going to need to deal with in the delivery of our homes across the board, but particularly build to rent.
Yeah. Thanks, Brendan. Matt, very quickly, do you want to give me your best guess as to what the rental market's potential is in terms, how much it can deliver as a percentage of total new home delivery?
I'd feel uncomfortable doing that, putting a number or a percentage on it. One thing I will say is, if we can move from a reactive environment, so it's very slim opportunity for land development, specifically for the build to rent or any kind of rental product, basically. And then there are opportunities, of course, to forward fund original built for sale properties. But the thing is, that comes typically under time of stress. So everyone wants to be wanted, I guess. So if we can move into a more proactive mindset, help demystify some of that, it doesn't have to always be a build for sale developer or the investment vehicle behind it suddenly needing, support. The same scheme that you maybe spoke about 3 years ago as an opportunity for build to rent, and it's a no-go. 3 years later, depending on market conditions, can come back and suddenly it's that. The difference is there's already a compromise because it's not then purpose-built, intentional, quality homes for rental. So if we can move to a more proactive measure, you can see that needle shift.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks, Matt. Matt, there's a question for you there from Suzanne Luscombe that we don't really have time to discuss now, but maybe I can encourage you two to contact each other and keep the conversation going.
Be happy to.
Great stuff. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, Matt. That was another fascinating session. And now we are going to move on to talk about ESG and climate change, which is, the issue that's dominating every facet of the real estate market. Let's get our fantastic speakers to introduce themselves before we get stuck in. Ding, would you like to go first? Good morning to you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, George. So Ding Li, Associate Director at Longevity Partner. What we do is we develop and review a company's ESG strategy. We help companies to get ahead of the trend, mitigate risks, and capture opportunity associated with environmental, social, and governance issues. I'm not sure if everyone knows longevity already, but Alex did mention it before in the introduction. So Longevity Partner, we're a multidisciplinary sustainability consultancy, providing energy and sustainability advice for property and infrastructure funds and property manager, also with the build to rent sector as well. So we're currently operating in 40 countries, working with more than 100 institutional investors across all asset classes.
Great stuff. Thank you, Ding. And Clint, welcome to you.
Hello. Thank you for having me. With Cortland Consult, we are a BTR consultancy. We've consulted around 50,000 homes across the United Kingdom, Spain, and Ireland. We help people, basically investors, operators, and developers to design buildings properly to make them institutional BTR, to look to the institutional market for their purchase. We help them with the operational design strategies, their management strategies, different prop tech features into buildings, always taking in mind ESG as the background and how we're going to be taking care of that as we design the buildings. We also look at PBSA and co-living as other sectors. But we are a general consultancy, myself, Ian Murray, and others. We're big advocates of build to rent, and we continue to push the market. And our goal is to get everybody into a nice, beautiful home, whether it's rental or not. That last conversation was very interesting to me because it's just everybody talking about what it really is, the sector. These are just beautiful rental homes of good quality and great places for people to live. And that's what we're all trying to do. So it's good.
Excellent. Thank you, Clint. Just staying with you for a moment, Clint. Who is driving the ESG agenda, particularly on the environmental performance side in the build to rent sector? Is it the investors? Is it architects and designers? Is it the government, or is it the end user, who we'll come on to talk more about afterwards?
Yes, this is a tricky question. I got this question, but in my mind, we see a little bit of both. The end user is starting to come up, and that's what everybody's hoping for. The younger user is looking at products and saying, if I want to live in this building, what are they doing? And that we're starting to see that, which I think we all know that's what we all hope will occur, because the environmental agenda inside our buildings, it's important to all of us. And it's the right thing to do for all investors, owners, operators, whatever it might be. But beyond that, the government's policies and what they're doing in the background, and this also is in the UK, as well as Ireland, as well as Spain, as well as inside America, where the funds are coming from. The government agendas are pushing them to make ESG part of their curriculum and things they have to put in their CV. So they're basically putting that into their CV so they can make sure they can monitor it and show everybody what they're doing. And that is the ESG agenda all the way across. So government putting their policies in, and then that's making investors have to react to that. Investors and funds are basically putting that together and saying, we have to do at least these things, which, putting my hand on my heart, I love seeing it now. I'm an American, but I've been in the UK now for 10 years. I love, talking to my American colleagues and people I know in America, and they say now they know the word ESG and they understand that, and they're using that terminology. So we're starting to see the globe react to that. And that's the investment community, which will be looking to offer investments to companies who are looking at these things. Architects and designers are starting to, they know that that's an influential piece when they look at a building. They can look at both pieces as far as how the building's designed, but it's also the social interaction inside the buildings. I think Ding, she's going to have a lot of comments on this, but I think this is a great thing is, build to rent is truly, the social piece is really important for build to rent. That's building community inside the buildings, as well as just making sure people have good light and, high-speed internet, all the things that they should have when they come into a building. Then beyond that, the operators, the BTR operators are truly, that's what they're genius at. I think Matt mentioned it earlier. It's just, when you become great at delivering buildings, with good back end, community building events and things that help people live together and, live in a social environment where they can work and live together. That's really what BTR is going to evolve into and what it'll be. But we are excited to see that the end user is starting to say, and we're starting to see this as, hey, you need to make sure you're taking care of this. This is something I'm more attracted to as we go along, and they'll want to live in buildings that have ESG agendas and things at the forefront that help whether it's the environment, whether it's the social side, or just even how they track that. If you're not tracking it and doing the governance behind it, you can't display that in your marketing. So they're starting to look at different symbols on websites and saying, wired score. Is this building wired score? We're seeing that. Is this building, does it have a well standard to it? Does it have Fitwell or active score? Those kind of scores are things that we're seeing, and we're seeing consumers starting to ask those questions, which is really, really good. And we hope that continues because it's the right thing for everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Clint. So Ding, who typically engages you to look at a build to rent product? Who is the one who takes the decision to engage a company such as yours? Is it the money behind a project? Is it the developer? How does it work?
Well, it really varies. So, and across different region where we operate, it also varies. Sometimes it's from the investor, sometimes it's from the property manager themselves. But I would say usually it's being driven by the same agenda. And perhaps I like to touch on the questions that you have, George, you asked just now. And I think Clint gave a very good answer. And I want to summarize actually the whole reason why people are, working on their environmental or ESG agenda. Ultimately, it comes down into two things. It's just revenue and operational costs. But it's that ESG is being used as a tool to improve revenue and reduce operational costs. And investors see the long-term value of sustainability. They look at the climate risk and opportunity in the long run, and they know if the building is more sustainable with a better energy efficiency, that helps with profit creation. And there are tools out there that are assessing a building strength risk, as in when climate risk will be so pricey that the building is not worth to own anymore. So things like this actually is not about just simply goodwill, but there's a dollar sign. There's the monetary value behind it.
And we touched on the end user there, and Clint mentioned that they're becoming more influential in the whole process. So are people comparing build to rent developments and opting to choose where they want to live based on the environmental credentials of a building? Is that happening yet?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Ning.
Please do. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll say this seems to be the case when we work with build to rent clients. So we do tenant engagement quite often when we develop strategy for our build to rent client. And from the tenant feedback, it seems that majority of the responses saying yes. Whether or not that is the real case, we don't know, but at least this is what they're telling us. And it makes sense because of, it depends on the type of lease, but if the tenant's going to pay the energy bill, then the energy price has been increasing. So there's no brain, it's a no-brainer that tenant care more about sustainability, about the energy efficiency of the building.
Yeah.
Sorry.
To add to that, regarding, looking at home views reports and different survey results of different buildings, starting to, the younger consumer, the 18 to 24-year-old, the one thing they can see, and we noticed that they admire in buildings is truly just the recycling pieces, because it's a very straightforward thing. When you go into a building, whether they have an effective recycling program, that's just important to them. Whether you have biophilic design or a lot of plants around the building, that's important to them. You get a little bit older, the 28 to 35-year-old, they start focusing more on the costs. And how the utility costs, what they're paying, or if they would have been living in this building compared to that building. And they realize that built to rent buildings are built very efficiently, and they're usually newer. So the end user is starting to come around and understand what the differences are. So we're starting to see that's an exciting part of what's coming. And we hope that continues, because this is what will make ESG become established in the market. But, we need more in the UK, we need more built to rent buildings actually operating. There's only so many that are actually up and built. We're starting to get those comparisons between city and city, and building to building, and all of us are taking that data and trying to really scrub into that and analyze it. But it is cost savings, because that helps the end user as well as the building owner. But then also, it is truly that, we're doing the right things. I think people are starting to see that. Everything from starting to see allotments in buildings to just, more green, more natural light, all the things you can do, fresh air, which is, seems so obvious, but getting fresh air in buildings is really, really important. So all those little design features and making sure you're doing it properly from the beginning makes a big difference.
Thanks, Clint. There was quite an interesting bit of research published this week by Spike Global and a couple of other companies about how tenant engagement can really affect a building's performance as well. I mean, I think it was focusing mainly on the student sector where the rent includes bills, and obviously especially that student demographic are quite inclined to have the heating whacked up full and never touch the thermostat. And the numbers they came out with were astonishing, actually. The savings that can be made if the thermostats are turned down 2 or 3 degrees. So what part does tenant engagement and education play, Ding, in making sure a building is operating as efficiently as possible?
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. And this is a trend that we're seeing as well, about tenant engagement, especially when bills are included in the rent. So tenant might have less incentive to reduce their energy use and therefore contribute to a lot of other environmental impact. And I think also because company are setting net zero carbon targets, they are looking at their climate risk, they are looking at how efficient their portfolio, their asset is when comparing to their peers. Usually this is measured at a whole building level, and even if we look at climate risk for clients, we'll also look at whole building. So which means tenants emission will be included when an investor come in and look at the building's climate risk. So, and not to mention, I think multifamily asset actually has a much higher transition or regulatory risk when we look at climate risk. So when comparing to hotels or lodging, leisure, or recreational asset. So this is particularly important. And we've seen that clients that have a tenant engagement program actually have not just improving in terms of their energy efficiency level, but also with the stronger buy-in, better engagement with tenants, they managed to have more loyal tenants, if that makes sense, and they are able to charge actually a premium for that with the other offerings, the social initiative, or because of the engagement that they have, the tenant would like to stay with them longer.
Thank you, Dan. Clint, let's address the S in ESG.
Okay.
What are a build to rent development's obligations to its local community and its surroundings to help meet the S?
Meet the S. They're, as far as their true regular, anything they have to do to meet the S. For the local community, when you're going through the process and the planning process, there's always a community element just to dealing with the local community surrounding the building. And what we're seeing is a BTR building of scale, a nice size building in a certain area. It's truly reinvigorating an entire area of a city. It's putting, let's say a 300 unit building, that's 600 people probably living upstairs every night, and making a community around it. From the retail that's probably going to be on the ground floors, from how the people are going to enter the building and the active frontage that comes along those streets, it's recreating that community. And there's a lot of value for the community in that. Now, the operator themselves, that's where built to rent, specific built to rent operators, at Cortland, we look at it and we say we try to do the right thing for the right reason. So, we're doing the right thing. We're trying to get into that community, work with any of the neighbors and the businesses around us, all the neighbors around us, and make sure that those 600 people that are, hanging around in that area, now that's their home, that they feel like that's their home. And they also have neighbors that are part of their home. And that's where they stay. And the whole goal of this, and this Ding would attest to this, is you're trying to get people to make friends, and make as many friends as they possibly can, so that it becomes their community. So then they stay longer and they'll stay in those communities, and that helps everything in regards to the social side of it. Everything, all the events you put on, most of them are tenant led, like I know they were talking about, tenant running clubs and, tenant, whatever it might be. All those things do make that effective. Well, you can open that up to the local community. And then people start joining, you meet in front of the building and you go for a run. And that is happening. And we're seeing all these great things. And that's just, it's more of a neighborhood feel. If you want to make it, we're creating neighborhoods, and that's what build to rent can really bring to a lot of cities throughout the UK, or these smaller towns. Even we're starting to see that there's a value in this, because it is uplifting those little areas, or those areas that you're putting a beautiful building in the middle of a downtown that is relatively derelict right now. It's helping that social community come out of it, and it's uplifting that whole area. But it's also taking people from homes that could have been for young families in the area, and they're moving into these flats because they want a little bit better lifestyle. Then the young families can actually go and find a home, and they can rent it, and they can do different things. So depending on if you're calling it a single family BTR, or straight up apartment tower, whatever it might be, it's truly just a good rental product, a good quality rental product that people are moving into, and that's uplifting those areas and helping the communities.
Yeah, great stuff. Ding, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Clint touched on a very important point about engaging with local communities, and we're seeing some good practices in the market is actually to look at what are the social issues currently exist in the local community, whether that is unemployment, whether that's there are a lot of senior people living around the community that needs help with visiting, or so on and so forth, the kind of social issues that exist in the community. And if we can engage with tenants and have programs, initiatives that connect the tenants with the local community, actually that also helps with the sense of belongings, and it will hugely create social value around the asset.
Thanks, Dean. Let's move on to the climate change piece. Clint, what do you think are going to be the biggest changes in the way build to rent developments are designed, built and operate in response to our changing climate? I mean, we saw in London this summer temperatures in the 40s, and we've seen this the last few weeks, this crazy monsoon type rain. How's that going to affect what the buildings look like and how they're made?
Yes, this is a common question. Most built to rent buildings that are getting designed and built today are very efficient. So that's one good thing. The big question we get a lot is, do we need to be putting in air conditioning? Do we need to think that as it gets, if the planet is warming or whatever it might be? And those are big factors that are coming into it. I don't think people are quite there yet, and the sector is not quite realizing that how long term they're going to look at this. But I think the more people are focusing on, electric vehicle, how many electric vehicle charges we're going to have, how that sector is going to change and bring that into build to rent, and how many parking spaces or whatever it might be. People are starting to, work around that and understand it. But the buildings themselves, the modern methods of construction are really what can change how fast things can come into a market, and then how fast they're going to be built. And at the end of the day, everybody's looking at the investment, and how they're going to perform. But it's hard to look at it, 100 years from now, what's going to be the difference, or 50 years, what's going to happen to the climate, or even 5 years from now. But we are starting to see that people are really starting to think about that. I had a long conversation with an architect the other day. They were trying to limit the amount of windows, from floor to ceiling windows, to make them half so it'd be more efficient. I agree with the efficiency of it, but then I also say, well, you need more natural light. And they were like, well, the natural light doesn't come in from the lower part. We're all starting to have those conversations. And I think that we're getting to the points of it's going to become better, but it's just nobody knows how fast the climate change is going to occur in the world. But I think depending on where you're located, if you're in the UK, we've got a little more time to think about it. But if say you're in Florida, you might, or other places in the world, you might think about it a little differently. So I don't know why I say Florida, but I just say that because it had a big hurricane and all that water came in a few months ago. But it's a matter of those understandings of how we're going to deal with that. I think the whole globe needs to step back and think about it. I think we're taking good steps with the ESG agendas now, and then we're going to have to continue to plan for the future.
It didn't feel like we had much time to think about it when I arrived at Gatwick in July from Spain, and it was 10 degrees hotter at Gatwick than it was in Spain.
Yeah.
2 degrees. That was a wake-up call.
Yeah.
Ding, are we seeing things like rainwater recycling and renewable generation in build-to-rent buildings? Is this kind of technology being incorporated yet?
I think it depends on where the asset's located. In an urban environment, renewable energy generation usually is quite limited when comparing to the overall consumption of the building. Water recycling right now, we don't see that happening often. Depends on the region. I mean, in regions that are more susceptible to water scarcity issues, then yes, perhaps somewhere in Southern Europe.
And have we got build-to-rent developments here in the UK that are of a sufficient scale to have their own kind of power generation, you know, like district heat networks, ground source heat pumps and stuff? Are UK build-to-rent buildings becoming self-sufficient in energy generation, or is that a way off in the future?
I would say it depends on, it really depends, because we see clients that have a, like, for example, air source heat pump, but not a lot of them. And I think it's also quite difficult for building to retrofit with that scale of, you know, energy generation infrastructure. So right now I don't see that a lot, but perhaps Clint, you can add to this if there's any case study that you like to share.
Yeah, I'd say they're attempting it. So everybody's trying to get to that route, but it is scale. There is some, if they're moving into an area that already has a district heating system underneath it, or, Wembley, or, Vauxhall, or somewhere where it's already there, they're able to tap in and utilize those sources. But as far as the scale of just a build-to-rent project of that size, we haven't been involved with that, but people are thinking about it if it can be done. You are seeing some more centralized heating systems and come into buildings, which almost every building is electric now, which is something that gas is falling away. We're seeing people move away from that, which is it's just starting to understand what can be done. Solar is still something that people always seem to do something with, but there could be more of that. How they use solar on the side of buildings. There is a good amount of sun in this country, and if weather continues to change, we should get more sun. So that's a good thing. Wind and all those other generation projects, it could happen. It still comes down to storage and what people are going to do with how they're going to store the power. We're starting to see, in the single family homes, we're starting to see people plug in their cars at night to power their homes during the day. The solar is powering the car, and then at night the car is powering the house. We're starting to see some neat, objectives in that. We're starting to see the BTR initiatives in regards to the single family BTR. But as far as big scale projects, it's typically the cost of installing it is still outweighing the benefit to the contractor and the investor initially. That's where we need to see more technology and more initiatives and more advancements in how those systems can work together to make big multidisciplinary groups work together in regards, because you'll have office buildings, BTR, hotel, everything will be in a master development. How do they all work together to make that an effective process through an entire development? It's coming, and someday it hopefully will occur. And I think we're all trying to figure that out, because we all know we need to save energy and make buildings more effective. But at this point, we're not seeing that quite yet. And the recent, with the recent, turn of, things slowing down a little bit in the economy, we're seeing that turn. But we're hoping that this agenda can just continue to push forward, and it's something that cannot stop. So just make it happen.
Well, I mean, we're seeing a lot of the big financial institutions and the big real estate companies, Hines, Nuveen, etc. They've set themselves some quite ambitious timelines for becoming net zero carbon, 2035, 2040, around there. That's not that far away. And from what you're saying, we're a long way off that. Are these targets achievable, do you think?
They're great targets. Are they achievable? Possibly. But I think we all need to continue to work together, and it's going to take the investment market, it's going to take the developer market, and the governments to continue to work together and just find a way to achieve that. So.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I think net zero carbon target is right now I think we're waiting for, not really waiting, but the industry is still coming up with a universal definition of what net zero really means, and there are a lot of other different framework flying out there, and there's a risk of some company might be, gaming this definition of what net zero really means. Achieving the target itself is, I would say, is possible, because net zero carbon ultimately means that at the end you have to offset your residue emission. However, whether that is being used as the last resort of the net zero carbon journey, we will need to make sure companies are really doing that. And I think the industry is coming together to create a UK net zero carbon building standard right now. So our longevity partners also involved to provide case study. I think when we have that universal definition of what net zero carbon means, I think things would be much clearer whether or not that is too ambitious, whether the industry needs to do more work in order to achieve net zero carbon. And I think to add on to something we discussed before about how climate change would be affecting the build to rent industry. Right now, we're seeing increasing climate events like heat stress and water scarcity in region that of Europe and in the UK. And I think right now, we haven't been really designing building looking at the performance of when it is in operation. So standards such as design for performance, really looking at when this building is commenced, how much energy it will use, and in the climate scenario in 5 years, 10 years time, the temperature rise, etc., and design it according to, for example, passive housing, passive design that doesn't require an aircon system, for example. So these are the kind of things that the industry will need to start thinking about. And I think there are a lot of industry experts are coming together to create standard guidelines like this for companies.
Just one last quick question for you, Ding. Are there any advances in building materials or techniques around the corner that we might see beginning to be deployed, which are going to help address this issue?
Yeah. I would say major advancement, not necessarily. I think it has been here already. There's a lot of low carbon building materials, and there are a lot of different design and construction methods that can reduce embodied carbon. It's just that before, I think the industry, a lot of companies weren't really thinking about it because there were no incentive, and really people were just doing what I've been doing in the past 10 years, 20 years. But now that climate change, carbon emission is on the agenda, then people start really looking at this, low carbon building materials. And I think putting more investment into the development of this building materials really helps. But I would say not that I know that there's a huge advancement in terms of technology and building materials, but it's now that people are paying more attention and realize they actually exist.
Yeah. There's a very big task ahead, not just for build to rent, but for the real estate industry in general. It's quite daunting. Thank you, Ding. Thank you, Clint. Another fascinating conversation. Samantha, I'm sorry I haven't got time to get around to your question. It's a really good one, but it would probably take another webinar on its own to address that. Which is food for thought. Maybe we will do another one on that. Thanks to all our speakers. I think that was a really fascinating snapshot of 3 of the main issues affecting build to rent. It was great stuff. So thank you very much. We're just going to show a few slides before we wrap up. We're also going to run the countdown clock again for a couple of minutes at the end of the session, so you can take some notes of all the info that's been posted in the chat. There's quite a bit there. So next week is the next Urban Living Insights event, and this one will be face-to-face, I'm glad to say. It's next Thursday, and it's looking at the senior living market, and that's taking place at the offices of Catton, who are a law firm in the city. There is a link for you to register there. And as you've already been on board for this one, there is a guest code, a guest promo code there, so you can come along to that at no cost. Another really great speaker lineup there, and it will be a similar format, 3 30-minute discussions, but with the added benefit of loads of coffee, a nice breakfast, and some face-to-face interaction. So I hope to see some of you there. Another event that we're running, which is taking place in January in Lisbon, is called Recharge. It's a really great event looking at the the convergence of various real estate and hospitality sectors. Again, the link for info for that one is in the chat. And if you'd like to work with us, maybe get involved with sponsoring some of our events or our webinar strands or any of the other solutions that we can offer, please get in touch with one of my colleagues there, Piers or Katie. You can see their details on the screen and also in the chat. So thanks for watching today. We're going to leave the countdown running for a couple of minutes, as I said. Thanks for watching. Thanks to all our speakers. Thanks to H&G and Skate for sponsoring. And hope to see lots of you next week at the Senior Living event. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.